I don't think of myself as being artistic in any way. I think of myself as like trying to create a scramble where everything's up for grabs and then just try to push things into an order that I can stomach. So on my hard drive at any point in time, I have hundreds and hundreds of bits that I don't know what to do with. By and large, I start writing on bass. I usually inject a random seed at the start, like some kind of sample that I then put out of context by changing it rhythmically, running it through software, whatever it is to get me out of my own head. And then I will just select small chunks of it, loop over them, and then improvise 10 minutes. Move to the next bit, improvise for 10 minutes, move to the next bit. And then when you start to select bits that maybe work together by accident, because the idea is about creating accidents, just again to get past my own personal reflex of making really boring, redundant music, as I see it anyway. So I've just got all of this material that relates in some way, conceptually and harmonically, to each other, and I'll start stringing them vertically and horizontally, and until it starts to appeal to me musically, and then I'll do the smearing. I'll completely reevaluate. So, I'll put the human touch of playing from start to finish over it to make it sound like music rather than, like you said, collage. But then you've got the task of, all right, now I need to learn on my instrument how to play this. And by doing that, you start to introduce consistency.
All right, before you go, take a quick listen to this.
I want to live in a gated community. I want to eat from a gated sack of rice. And I want to touch your gated inner thigh. I want to feel my gated inner brain function. I want to live in a gated community. I want to live in a gated community. I want to turn white with gated inner happiness. I want to feature in a mini feature, a gated one.
Hi, I'm Igor, and you're watching the Sonus Aurelius Podcast. What you just heard was Porcus versus Equus, an eclectic blend of styles that's really hard to categorize. In this episode, we talk to Andrew Piskun, who is the bassist, vocalist, and mastermind behind the band. Andrew talks to us about his creative process and how his antithetical tendencies moved him away from the crowd and helped him shape a unique style. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to see more content like this, I've got a ton of great interviews just like this one coming up, and I would really love for you to join me on that journey. All right, without further ado, here's Andrew.
Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me. I'm really excited about this interview. I've seen you live, and it was something else. So I thought to start off, how did you get into music?
I suppose it depends if you mean getting into listening to music or getting into playing music. Before I was playing music, I wasn't really listening to music in any sort of interesting way. It was really just recording Take 40 Australia as a kid, and then listening to that all week, and then recording the next one, and then listening to that all week. Various other kind of not particularly interesting ways of listening to music, basically just receiving it.
Yeah.
I had a romantic notion about what being a musician was when I was, maybe 11 or 12. And I think that romantic notion didn't extend much further than, I guess, smoky bars and, pub rock.
Yeah.
And so thanks, Mum. She got me a guitar when I was 12, an acoustic guitar. I got an electric guitar when I was 13, and a piece of rubbish. Got a decent one when I was 14. Thanks again, Mum. And I guess just having that instrument there, it became a problem-solving exercise. How do you make this thing do something that you don't hate? And I didn't actually have lessons for a long time, so I thought my guitar was broken at first, my first acoustic guitar, because it was out of tune. And so there was a lot of I spent a lot of time by myself as a kid, just working on projects, building things, taking things apart, putting them back together again, usually badly. And so guitar was kind of the same. I just tried to figure out ways to interact with it. And so my auntie one day taught me how to tune the guitar because she was over, and thanks, Rita. She convinced me that it wasn't broken. It was actually perfectly fine tuning guitar. It's a nylon string, and she's a primary school teacher, and so I guess I'd played some guitar in that context as well. Just playing and singing with the kids. And so once that problem was solved, then there were a whole lot of other problems to solve. Just started just learning whatever was around. The neighbours, gave me sheet music that related to when they were kids. I couldn't read music, so I started to try to figure out what was going on there. I didn't have a great deal of a set of preferences in terms of what I listened to that was very strong. As I said, I was just a receiver of the culture as it came in, although I did like listening to music. But then all these kind of older folk that were giving me these bits of sheet music, well, they reflected their preferences, I guess, when they were teenagers. So that was music going back to the 60s and the 70s and sometimes earlier. And in order to actually kind of learn these things properly, I had to listen to them, and that started crafting my new musical preferences. And then I guess I started buying guitar magazines and just started to learn whatever was in there without really any regard to whether it was any good or what I thought about it. At a certain point, I grew up in Melbourne. It's outer western suburbs. There's the most western suburb in Melbourne, I think it was at the time. Probably still
it would
is.
have been a regional town back then.
Yeah, that's right. There wasn't much. I wasn't picking up anything interesting by osmosis from my peers in terms of music. The outside of music was really metal, and as soon as that, once I hit about 14, that became huge for me, and my self-perception as liking kind of outside of music. It's also a virtuoso kind of dominated genre, and I had very few skills, but it did lead me to kind of wanting to practice. And in the absence of lessons, I guess just learning, thrash metal tunes became my way of kind of discovering what the guitar did. When I first learnt what a palm mute was, and that was huge because I'd been playing back the Metallica album and Justice for All through my little stereo that I had in my bedroom, and I didn't know what it was that was happening, but there was this weird sound that came out through the speakers and kind of rattled the windows, and it was this bassy kind of chunky sound, which I had no idea how to connect that to the instrument. Turned out it was just palm muted power chords, and so that was another revelation. Just all these things that if you had guitar lessons, someone could teach you in a second. Where very slowly, I picked up very, very slowly, and so that's kind of how that I think that moment of getting into metal, and I still like heavy music. It's just not my predominant. It's just not my predominant choice in terms of what I like to listen to. And I guess my education in heavy music stopped when I was a teenager, so I know nothing about modern, heavier styles of music. But that started the idea that that music isn't something that you receive from the culture. It's something that you develop and participate in, and it's okay to be outside of what's going on. So probably that's the story. The main getting into music thing, I think, was discovering I guess thrash metal first, Because then that led me to other things, like when I picked up the bass and got into Primus in the 90s. You know, I was a 16-year-old and I'm trying to play these speedy bass parts, but that again came from metal. So it could be, you know, because some metal people like the virtuosity thing, and there was
Yeah, wow, it's an eclectic journey, isn't it? You started off with top 40 and the influence of mainstream music of the 90s, and then moved through to what sounds like was really just being influenced by adults in your life and getting exposure to the classic, the 104, the Gold 104 sort of standard.
Yeah.
And then getting into metal, because obviously there's a period in your life in your teenage years where you start to develop a sense of self, and you know, there's a part of you that kind of wanted to rebel maybe or be different.
Yeah, I think so. Also, I think there was something about that heavier sound and the pulse that really I'd already discovered. I can only say this in retrospect. It seems like all these things are essential when looking back, but they could just be happy accidents. But for example, if my mum really liked Cat Stevens, and the song Wild World has this pulse. And I remember that gave me the same feeling that heavy music later did, which was this really strongly defined pulse that made you almost made your body want to move in alignment with the pulse. So I think partly it's about rebellion, but partly I think it was actually just musically, it had the things in it that I already liked from the other stuff that I listened to. By accident.
Yeah, and so clearly you're into like rhythm, and the draw to bass was sort of an extension of that.
Yeah, and also just necessity. I mean, I had very little confidence in my ability to play, or even I was a shy kid, right? That's not unusual, as a lot of us are or were. And then as we get older, we work it out, and you know, we don't seem shy anymore. So when I switched to bass year 11, I changed schools. I went to what was then called Footscray City Secondary College, so travelling on the train. And that was on the basis of doing the music program. So I did an audition, you know, it was all very scary and exciting to be allowed in as an out-of-zone student, because at the time they were known for, you know, outside of the private school system, I guess they were known as being a art/music focused high school. And when I went there, there were a lot of guitarists. I don't know to this day if they were actually better than me, but I think I perceived them to be. And and they were all kind of competing. They were all rock guitarists.
Yeah.
There weren't any jazz guitarists. There weren't classical guitarists. It was all rock guitarists. They all had long hair. Mostly were taller than me. I guess I felt intimidated, and no one wanted to play bass. And I already liked Primus, so I thought bass can be cool. And so I just said, you know, I'll play bass. And by having that little space to myself in this group of people all, you know, wanting to do a thing in the way that they perceive it, because, you know, rock music's pretty conservative in a lot of ways. I was able to then, I guess, focus on my own little thing and craft it without too much social pressure to do it one way or the other. So I kind of crafted a niche for myself in late high school, and that was bass. Wow. And it ended up working really well for me, because I didn't realize this, but I really gravitate towards rhythm, and just to feeling, I suppose, connected to rhythms, whether they're, you know, very straight or very complicated, and it kind of connects to the body. It just, it suited me. I mean, maybe I would have been better as a drummer even, but the bass worked.
Yeah, and so when you started getting into fully into music, there was a period of time where you made the decision, which sounds like it was very pivotal, that insulated you from the social pressure of having to be a particular way or to perform better than others, and that led you to develop your own craft, your own creative sort of
Yeah,
output.
actually funny. I hadn't thought about it until we had this conversation, but I think that's probably true. There were a bunch of things. Most of them are actually probably more technology driven than socially. But yeah, that's definitely true. I think thinking about it now that you mention it, but it did insulate me from a lot of, I guess, the forces that make people all start to move together a little bit, at least. I mean, obviously we're all subject to that still. And I was a teenager, and I had a teenage ego, and I wanted to be accepted, like everyone, almost, I guess.
And so when you started sort of tinkering away, insulated from the pressures of everything else, how do you think your songwriting developed?
Yeah, so that one's totally around technology. So when I was 16, it was year 11 again. So I'd been recording myself from when I first got an instrument, even when before I could tune it properly. I'd been trying to sing along with the guitar, and I'd record it onto a cassette record. I mean, it was a common thing that people came up with spontaneously. It seems like everyone came up with the same idea. You record using the microphone on the cassette recorder, and you've got another cassette recorder. You play back the original one and you play along with it. Now you've got multi-track recording, right? It's a bit of a hack. Yeah. And but this amazing thing happened when I got to Footscray City when I was 16. This would be 94, 93, probably 94. That tells you how old I am, I guess. And in the music department at the school, at the high school, they had a 4-track, like a Tascam 4-track. That now in retrospect, I can see it was the top of the line Tascam 4-track, and it was a lovely little unit. And it probably is half the fact that it was so good is probably half the reason I persisted, because I immediately got results that I liked. So they let me personally play with that at school. So at lunch breaks, I started just going in and playing with the 4-track, recording stuff, working out how to use a mixer as well, and a compressor, and because I had a little bit of gear, and just by trial and error, I had no idea how to really do it, and they let me take it home because no one else was using it. And so then basically all of the time that I had available to me at that point just ended up getting funneled into the 4-track. So and then, I became obsessed with just this idea of layering things on top of each other and trying to work out what went together. And so it wasn't really about songwriting. It was actually just about tinkering and experimenting. It just like, when I was a kid, I guess, and I'd been pulling things apart and putting them back together again. So that technology injection there is probably had the biggest. It started a lot of different things and put me on a whole lot of different paths, and it led to me being an early adopter of digital recording technology, right at the start when, like probably exactly when it started to be possible, and which I've, been following ever since. So a lot of things happened as a result of that, and all of it was about experimenting. It was just about the kind of the joy of discovering new things. And again, because I hadn't had any lessons, actually by this stage I had some lessons. I did do an audition to get into music program. I was getting lessons at school and so on, but it was still pretty rudimentary. And so a lot of what I was actually doing was, and this, ended up being the same as what I do now. I have, in some ways, I try to overcome the fact that I don't like my first instincts. So through problem solving, experimentation, messing around with stuff, trial and error, putting things together that shouldn't go together until something just kind of clicks, kind of bypasses the fact that the first thing I want to do is write a few chords that sound generic and boring.
So it seems that there's the musicality of it, and that generally developed with time, and you weren't necessarily as inspired by that as much as you were by literally the physical thing and messing around with things and playing.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's just true. That's think about yourself, but about anyone really. What's a person's, what are their key characteristics, defining characteristics? But one of the things I've always liked to do is just play around with stuff. Whether it be, electronics, taking things apart. When I was a kid, building kits, soldering iron. There's always a soldering iron around. So yeah, it was a tinkerer's approach. It was more like messing around with wood and tools in a shed rather than, having inspiration and needing to get something out.
And there's a visceral element to that, isn't there? Being able to hold something and play with it and manipulate it.
Oh yeah, I think so. And I think that's actually, it's interesting you say that. That's pretty insightful, because it ended up being that visceral element that got me hooked in actually playing on the musical side, because I'm such a sucker for what the neck on a bass feels like. Just the contact. I play bass primarily with my fingers, except when there's something requires a pick. I can play fine with a pick, I play guitar. Just because, the feeling of connection, like of integration with another object is very pleasurable. And, and noting the differences between the instruments, how they make you feel, that was a thing I developed later, but it's still very true. But this, I think earlier on, it was less that and more just actually, this is an interesting object that represents a puzzle. And how am I going to work my way through this puzzle and somehow end up with something that doesn't irritate me, that actually, because of course I did listen to music a lot by that point, and the task, I guess, is somehow move through a process that ends up where you end up with something that gives you pleasure, whether or not you accept ownership of it, but it's not terrible, I think is the main thing. Yeah.
I have to say, when I listen to Alphabetical Order, I've listened to it several times, and the thing that comes across for me is the words that come across are patchwork of events, people, characters. And I mean patchwork in the sense that it feels like it was built. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like a musical thing. It's just so much more than that. It chops and changes, it tells stories, but it also does this in a really in almost like a collage.
That's actually, that's exactly what it is. So on my hard drive at any point in time, I have hundreds and hundreds of bits that I don't know what to do with. Alphabetical Order, by the way, most of the stuff on there I wrote when I was in my early 20s. So that's I basically just, at a certain point in time, I was just like, I haven't really released anything. I've been doing music forever. Why don't I just take some of my favorite bits out of my scrapbook and put them on Bandcamp? Get them mastered, put them on Bandcamp. Was kind of the idea there. So but I think I've gotten better at this now than I was then, which is why you can hear that I think the collage more. So what I had at the time was a lot of different parts, and I just stuck them together. And I was less good at then smearing over them to create the illusion of consistency. So, I mean, some of them actually were played with a band. So that kind of lends a kind of consistency to it by accident, just by virtue of humans playing through them. But a lot of them were literally just stuck together. And I think I had an aversion to repeating anything as well. So, I don't think I had a really intellectually, I don't think I had a reason for doing it. It was just to keep myself interested. Also laziness. I was just like, I hadn't yet come across the idea of developing a theme, I just, so a lot of those things also, because I ended up starting out, when I first went to uni, I went as a music student. I only lasted a year, but but I picked up a few things when I went there. I won't get diverted by that because it's a whole separate story. But I hadn't yet absorbed the lessons of that relate to the craft of composition, I guess. And so it really was just a happy accident. I think that some of them end up sounding okay, even though they were just really collages. These days, I still do that, except that then I have several layers of work. So like I'll have a whole lot of bits, and I'll do, if I've got a longer section, so let's just say a melody or by and large, I start writing on bass. Starts with a rhythm, and then I come up with something. But I usually inject a random seed at the start, like some kind of sample that I then put out of context by changing it rhythmically, running it through software, whatever it is to get me out of my own head. And then I will just select small chunks of it, loop over them, and a lot of tricks. This is just one, and then improvise 10 minutes, move to the next bit, improvise for 10 minutes, move to the next bit. And then when you start to select bits that maybe work together by accident, because the idea is about creating accidents, just again to get past my own personal reflex of making really boring, redundant music, as I see it anyway. But then you've got the task of, all right, now I need to learn on my instrument how to play this. And by doing that, you start to introduce consistency.
Yep.
So that's at the micro level of kind of introducing randomness and then enforcing consistency. And then you've got the structural law. So yeah, that was born of that. Essentially, I came across digital technology. I was able to copy and paste, so I did.
Yeah, and it's true to form, really, because you're a tinkerer at heart.
Yeah, I think so. But then at the end, that you really do need to get it back to energy and humanity in some way, I always think of, the only thing I do isn't my own music, right? So I've played in other bands and stuff, but in terms of the stuff that I do, I really want it to be almost like a party band, but it's got the dressing of a party band, but underneath it is some kind of post something or other art rock. But I want there to be a party, and for there to be a party, you have to have the humanity, and I think that comes out through the energy. You try to play in a spontaneous, energetic way, even though it's all composed and crafted, or leave leave spaces for improvisation or just random choice in the moment.
Yeah, and it's good because it's a great segue to the next question I was going to ask around drive. So there's clearly the problem solving part, the part of you that really wants to have a visceral experience with your instrument, almost be fused with it, and then that kind of translates into the recording and process. And what else drives you? It sounds like there's an element of the audience as well there.
Writing the music, there was never an intention to have a band. There was never intention to perform. Over time, it's just an activity that I've gotten engaged in, which is the writing and recording primarily, that keeps me engaged with life and makes me feel good. Then there's the performance, which is also enjoyable. Well, I have to say, and, so I almost hate to admit, I much prefer live performance when I'm just playing bass and it's not my songs. I can just enjoy the instrument, enjoy the audience. I guess I am a bit of an introvert. I have a pretty big, powerful ego as well. So I guess doing a good job and being seen to do a good job by other people is still a motivator, I have to admit.
Well, it's important to acknowledge that about yourself. I think when you don't acknowledge it, I think that becomes dangerous and self-indulgent.
Yeah, and that's right. And I think that, so I'm intensely aware of trying to avoid self-indulgence because I'm not trying to do anything I've never really had an impulse to try to do anything complicated just to be complicated, but I do have a urge to push myself and also to entertain myself. And if something is too straight in a way, I get it. I find it boring.
Yeah.
And there are exceptions in music that other people make. There are some, there are some people who do what they do so well that even though it's very straightforward, it gives me great pleasure. But usually I get bored. I get bored by a lot of music, including my own music, and so a lot of it's just an effort to not find myself boring. And then by accident, sometimes that ends up seeming a bit self-indulgent. So I'm always conscious of trying to bring it back to some kind of energy that can be shared. And that there's nothing wrong with chin scratching. I like to scratch my chin, but I'm not trying to make chin scratching music. I'm trying to make party music that just maybe expands the concept of party music a little bit.
Yeah, and clearly you want to connect with your audience. I think I think a wondrously frivolous way as well, because in listening to your music, there is a quirk, I think a humor that sits behind it. It's very funny, actually.
Well, I'm so happy you picked up on that, because it's very rare that I don't really have these conversations. How many opportunities do you get to go into great detail about your own motivations for doing things? It's quite a treat. I mean, maybe my partner will have heard me after a few too many drinks, but yeah. So I'm trying to also, I'm writing jokes for myself. And I think my jokes tend to be kind of have a bit of an absurdist bent, so, and they can just be little things that maybe you wouldn't even pick up, so, I don't know, one of my straightest songs is After Party off the, what's it called? Get Inside the Animal EP. And that's just really a lullaby about how it's okay not to want to die, because if you don't want to die, it means you're doing it right. And there's just a line at the end, but then next became the end and I was gone. And of course, you can't reflect on the past if you're dead. So it's just a minor absurdity that I try to kind of entertain myself by putting those little incongruences and contradictions all over the place. And I guess something like Music Out of Shit is a song and an EP, but the song seems very silly in the lyrics, but I actually submitted the lyrics to ChatGPT to see if it could tell me what it was about, because I know what it's about, but I was just thinking, does anyone actually know what? Could someone actually decipher this stuff? Because a lot of it seems, I think it's kind of stream of consciousness a bit, but it's not. It's highly, every syllable is thought out. But I mean, it's because I tend towards writing lyrics in a kind of silly, joking, absurd kind of way about trying to escape constraint. That, a lot of the songs are really just, if you boil it down, it's about you being prevented from doing something interesting and kind of complaining about it. And in Music Out of Shit is about the language holding you back, and the culture that language comes through holding you back, and you're just trying to throw absurd, just nonsense things together in order to escape, to try to create a scramble and have a fight with the culture to produce something musical. It sounds all it makes me sound like a wanker when I say it like that, which is, I guess, part of the reason why I usually hide it all under, it's kind of impressionistic, absurdist kind of jokes. But yeah, it needs to be funny.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, it's definitely funny. I mean, there are laugh out loud moments for me in your music. The one in particular that comes to mind is Gated Community. You know, there are some
I
lines.
thought you would say that.
Yeah, there are some lines in that just I literally chuckled out loud, and it's rare to have that experience with music these days. To what extent did your philosophy background influence the lyrics and the themes that you draw from?
I mean, that's actually, I haven't thought about that one. It probably just made me more aware of what I'm saying. So I don't know that I would have done necessarily differently. I seem to have been on the same track for a long time. Just that I can now look back at what I wrote like a critic and explain, or pretend to explain in a fairly sophisticated way what it all means. But in reality, so I just told you about how there was a meaning behind the song "Music Out of Shit." Mm. When I was writing that song, I wasn't aware of that meaning. Mm. I was immediately afterwards aware of it, and that's why I ended up calling it "Music Out of Shit." So that line came last. Yeah. But what I was aware of at the time is, what kind of syllable do I need here? I need something percussive. I need something sibilant. I need something with an open mouth sound. Even though it's just speech, the quality of the speech changes the flow of the rhythm, and also I think I did about 50 takes of that. You listen to it on the vocal, you listen to it, and it's just nothing. It's a person talking, but I couldn't help but keep gravitating towards the beat, and I wanted it to seem as though it was free time-ish, while at the same time being close enough to being in time to still be musical. So that was my primary concern, and throwing in jokes. But then at the end, it was clear that there was a theme, and I wrapped something around it. So it would be hard to say that philosophy influenced it. There are a few. I guess the straighter moments are probably more relevant. Like again, After Party, because there's a focus on. There's a mention of focusing on the next until the next isn't next anymore. I guess comes from certain particular. Well, I don't want to get into proper names. Could become another conversation, but. So I'd say not much.
And the themes that you deal with in your music are quite, complex and large at the same time. It seems like you sort of, it comes up naturally from a well within inside you, perhaps something that you've unconsciously been thinking about or dealing with, and then as it comes out and takes a physical form in the form of a song, it's then that you apply its meaning and suddenly go,
yeah. And I might even adjust some words to reinforce.
Reinforce that concept.
Implied that, but I do that musically as well. So, I hear that there was a kind of an echo of a melody there that I didn't quite. I didn't intend to write it, but it's kind of come through, and it's like moved from one part to another. And if we put those, I'm going to put those bits together, and now we have that melodic idea. A lot comes afterwards. Yeah.
Great.
And in terms of the themes, and welling up, I have, I guess it's not an uncommon thing. I don't like the feeling of being constrained by convention, although I know that it's convention that enables my reality. So it's just that feeling of irritation, because the thing that gives you what you have is also the thing that stops you having other things, and so that irritation, I think, is probably a bit of a source.
Yeah, that's such a relatable feeling, isn't it? For people who think about life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've got a last final question because we kind of got to the point where we explored, probably the middle phase of your musical journey.
Yeah.
What's the modern you look like? Because it sounds like the alphabetical order was kind of like the thing that came out of all of the your previous, your 20s, etc.
It was the kid stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so the modern you, how would you describe that modern musical sensibility and influence? And
well, I'm not hung up. I used to be very hung up on, I guess, the teenage element was still present in my 20s, where didn't want to do anything. Even if I liked it, if it was cheesy, I had to cut it out because I didn't want anyone to laugh at it. The next EP came about when I was in my when it was around 2010, 2011. I just moved up to Canberra, and I had some specific music I was listening to that put me more towards the surf guitar thing. And later I was just trying to write pop songs, not even to be PVE stuff, just for whatever. So I was consciously trying to actually write pop songs, which it didn't. I don't think it succeeded that way. But now I guess, as I said, I know what extended chords are. I have some idea of what I was trying to do before. So for example, so things like, oh well, let's give myself an exercise. All right. So there's a new song called Landstrider, which is it's about the Dark Crystal. See, it's one of those things that's maybe a bit cheesy that I would have avoided when I was younger, but I really loved that film when I was younger. And
so do I.
I wanted to. I was thinking about what it is. What is it that I love about when they ride on those big insect rabbit things called Landstriders?
Incredible, yeah.
But that started with just an exercise of basically let's go in reverse around the circle of fifths. So basically, if you can pick it up, and but just keep going down. But you can't keep going down because you run out of bass. So then you go up fourth, down a fifth, up fourth, down a fifth, up fourth, down a fifth. And then here's the exercise. Make it musical. And so you start reharmonizing, right? So you look at, every three of those, if you take a cluster of three, that's a suspended second. Now, if you also then take every two of them, that could actually just be a power chord and they're dropping by whole tones. Yeah, and so with that in mind, you can then start throwing thirds in here and there to actually start pushing to create, I guess, voice leading. Yeah. So after reharmonizing, and so this is actually a key. This would have come under, describe your approach to writing music. I mean, what is it? Tips and tricks. I'll come up with a thing. This is like a random seed element. So there's this exercise, which is circle of fifths. Just see if you can make something so unmusical, make it musical, and that will prevent me from writing songs in standard chord progressions. So what I'll end up doing is trying to harmonize. Firstly, make that circle of fifths bass line kind of rhythmically interesting, and then try to harmonize it in a way so that there's actually some voice leading. And then I'll throw away the original part. Just completely throw it away. And now I'll write a melody that goes with the harmony or the chord progression that I've created, which now sounds like interesting but kind of non-traditional chord progression. So then you try to create a melody that actually makes sense of that and gives you a feeling of satisfaction. I'll often then do a second level of reharmonization where I throw away that chord progression. Now I'll write something to service that melody specifically. And then now that I've done that, I might throw away the melody and write a melody that goes with the second reharmonization. And I might continue that process. Eventually, I've got like 50 parts, and I'll sort through them, and I'll say, well, it's almost like a symphonic approach, So I'll sort through them. I'll start to use them as components that you can put together that are like, I guess, start developing a theme. So I've just got all of this material that relates in some way, conceptually and harmonically, to each other, and I'll start stringing them vertically and horizontally, and until it starts to appeal to me musically, and then I'll do the smearing. I'll completely reevaluate. So, I'll put the human touch of playing from start to finish over it to make it sound like music rather than, like you said, collage. Constraints, things that shouldn't work, and then you have to tinker and experiment and problem solve in order to get them to fit together. The difference is now that I have more theory and skill, I can create my own. I've got a sense of what probably shouldn't work, so I start with that, and then try to get to somewhere where it works.
And there's a theme, or there's a thread here, isn't there, with this idea of problem solving and creating puzzles and tinkering. That first tier of experimentation. It just goes to show how much thought goes into your process, in your creative process.
Oh, it's if anything, it's overthought.
And you say philosophy hasn't influenced your.
Yeah, I guess maybe in that regard, but every single detail is, if you don't like it, you can be sure that I did, because there's nothing in there that hasn't been meticulously.
So we know it's your best.
Well, it's what I wanted. It's not necessarily my best playing or anything, but it's the bit that I liked.
Yeah.
And so I guess, what you would get from this is, I don't think of myself as being artistic in any way. I think of myself as like trying to create a scramble where everything's up for grabs, and then just try to push things into an order that I can stomach.
Order from chaos.
Yeah.
Mate, this was a great interview. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for your time.